The hidden books, why Maccabees disappeared. Let me start personal. When I was about 10 or 11 years old, I remember hearing people talk about two books, Maccabees 1 and Maccabees 2. The way they spoke about them made it sound like a secret, like these books were hidden, like they were kept back for a reason. And I remember hearing something else. People used to say the reason the Maccabees weren't shown or spoken about much is that if you read it, it can confuse you. Some even said it could drive people insane. Now imagine hearing that as a child. That sort of thing doesn't just disappear. It sits in your mind. It becomes a question you carry for years, even when you can't remember what you had for breakfast yesterday. So today I want to do something I should have done a long time ago. I want to deal with that childhood question properly and respectfully. I want to look at the myth, the truth, and the history. Were these books hidden? Were they removed? Why do some Bibles have them and others don't? And is there any truth to the idea that reading them harms your mind? By the end of this series, you'll not only understand the controversy, you'll understand the story itself, because once you know what happened in these books, you'll see why they carry so much weight. Now, let's deal with the myth first. The myth of the hidden books. A lot of people grew up with a Bible where these books simply aren't printed. Many grew up with the King James Version and assumed that if a book isn't in their edition, it never existed in the first place. But the truth is more detailed than that. Historically, early printings of the King James Bible did include books like Maccabees, not mixed into the Old Testament, but printed in a separate section between the Old and New Testaments. Many people refer to this as the Apocrypha. So why do so many people today have King James Bibles without those books? Because over time, many Protestant publishers stopped printing that entire section. That shift was influenced by tradition, doctrinal boundaries, publishing costs, and the desire for a standardized Bible that didn't include books seen as outside the canon in many Protestant churches. A significant historical moment came in the 19th century when organizations like the British and Foreign Bible Society helped normalize Bibles printed without the Apocrypha section. It wasn't a conspiracy, it was a publishing decision rooted in theological position. Different traditions drew different lines around which books were used to establish doctrine. So were the books hidden? In some homes, yes, hidden in the sense that they were not printed, not preached from much, and not familiar, but not because someone locked them away in a vault. Publishing habits changed. Churches spoke about them less. Many editions stopped including them. A generation grew up not seeing them. And whenever something is missing from your version of the Bible, it naturally creates questions. The insanity rumor. Now let's deal with the second part of the rumor, the heavy one. The idea that reading Maccabees can drive people insane. I'll say this plainly. I do not find credible historical evidence that these books were removed or avoided because they cause mental instability. There is no solid, documented statement from mainstream church history that says, do not read Maccabees because it will harm your mind. So where does that rumor come from? In my view, it comes from a mix of three things. First, intensity. These books are heavy. They deal with persecution, executions, political corruption, and war. If a person reads them young without guidance or context, it can feel shocking, not mind-breaking, but shocking. Second, confusion. These books can confuse people if they expect them to function like a neat sequel. First, Maccabees reads like straightforward history. Second, Maccabees covers overlapping events, but focuses more on spiritual meaning, prayer, martyrdom, and theological reflection. If someone reads both without understanding that they're different kinds of writing, they might think, why is it told differently? Why are the emphases different? Third, doctrinal controversy. There are theological debates tied to these books. When a book is disputed, it often gets avoided in public teaching to prevent arguments, and sometimes people interpret avoidance as danger. They mistake controversy for harmfulness. So here's the balanced truth I want you to hold. These books are not magic, they're not spells, they're not mind traps. They are intense history and intense faith under pressure. They can confuse you if you don't know the context. They can shake you emotionally because the suffering described is real and heavy. But that's not insanity, that's a human response to serious material. Setting the stage. Now, with that cleared up, let me set the stage for the story itself. These books sit in the time between the Old Testament and the New Testament. That period matters because it explains why some traditions treat them differently and why many people have never heard them preached from the front of a church. I'm reading these from the New Jerusalem Bible, which includes them, and I'll be clear throughout. The story comes from 1st and 2nd Maccabees. To understand the Maccabees, you need to understand the world they lived in. This is a time when empires rise and fall, power shifts, borders change, cultures clash. And when you live in the path of empires, you can become someone else's project. Greek influence spread across the region. Language, education, public life, entertainment, fashion, political ideas, and social customs. Some of that influence looked advanced. Some of it looked attractive. Some of it looked harmless. But for rulers, culture wasn't only culture. It was control. It was a way of making conquered people think the same way, live the same way, and ultimately worship the same way. Here's the key point. For the Jewish people, faith wasn't just private belief. Faith was a way of life. It was the Sabbath. It was the law. It was diet. It was covenant identity. It was family instruction. It was worship centered around the temple in Jerusalem. So when political power decided to reshape religious life, it wasn't just telling people to adapt. It was trying to rewrite who they were. And that's the storm behind Maccabees. In the next part, I'm going to tell you how that storm broke. The spark of resistance, how courage spreads. In part 1, we uncovered the myth. We talked about why the Maccabees disappeared from many Bibles, and we debunked the rumor that reading these books drives people insane. Now let's get into the story itself, because once you understand what happened, you'll see why these books carry so much weight and why they still matter today. The pressure builds. The story centers on a ruler named Antiochus IV Epiphanes, under whom conditions become severe. The issue isn't only political, it becomes spiritual, cultural, and personal. Decrees come, enforcement comes, punishment comes. Practices that were central to identity, such as keeping the Sabbath, circumcision, and adherence to the law, are targeted. Sacred things are treated as nothing. Worship is interfered with. The people are pushed to abandon their customs. This is the part that feels extreme. But history shows that when rulers want total control, they aim at the conscience. They don't only demand your taxes, they demand your identity. They demand your worship. They demand your loyalty down to the core. And when the pressure reaches that point, people face a crossroads. Some decide to blend in. Some decide to keep their faith private and comply outwardly. Some decide to resist. And the story of the Maccabees is the story of resistance, not because the people were chasing excitement, but because they believed surrender would destroy the soul of their community, the drift from within. But here's one of the most uncomfortable truths in the story. Some of the earliest steps toward collapse came from within, not only from outside. The pressure didn't begin with soldiers and weapons alone. It also began with a slow drift inside the community. Some people wanted to fit in with the dominant culture. Some wanted status. Some wanted influence. Some started treating obedience like an embarrassment and compromise like wisdom. They began adopting customs that blurred the lines that made them distinct. This is critical to understand. Erosion often begins with attraction, not force. One man's refusal, This is where 1st Maccabees introduces a priest named Mattathias. He's not introduced as a celebrity, not as a man with an army, but as a man with roots, conviction, and clarity about who he is. Officials come to his area to enforce the new rules. They want public compliance. They want an example. They want a respected figure to bow, because if he bows, others will follow. They appeal to reward. They appeal to status. They appeal to comfort. They offer him the easy way, but he refuses. And I want you to hold this lesson because it's one of the strongest lessons in the whole story. A movement can begin with one refusal. Not a speech, not a performance, a refusal, a line in the sand, a calm decision that says, not me, not here, not today. And in the heat of that moment, the situation erupts. Resistance becomes action. Mattathias and those who join him flee because you can't resist the empire politely and expect no consequences. From that moment, the movement is alive. Judas Maccabeus, discipline under pressure. After Mattathias, leadership passes to his son, Judas Maccabeus. The story describes him as strong, disciplined, and courageous. Now, when people think of faith, they often imagine only prayer and private devotion. But the Maccabees show another side of faith, the side that requires discipline, planning, and sacrifice. The resistance is outnumbered. They're hunted. They're facing a powerful system. So they become strategic. They organize. They train. They choose when to fight and when to withdraw. They understand terrain. They understand surprise. They understand that survival requires more than emotion. This is not rebellion for ego. This is resistance for identity. And as the story moves forward, it becomes clear that the battle isn't only military, it's also moral. Because when people are under pressure, the temptation to compromise is always present. And compromise doesn't always appear as a wicked decision. Sometimes it appears as a reasonable decision, a practical decision, a decision to keep the peace. But the Maccabees reveal that some peace is not peace. Some peace is surrender, the spiritual dimension. Now, 2nd Maccabees keeps bringing you back to the spiritual dimension. It highlights prayer, it highlights repentance, it highlights humility. It emphasizes that the struggle isn't only about numbers and weapons, but about purpose, faithfulness, and the unseen strength that comes from conviction. And this is where the story takes a turn that shakes people, because 2nd Maccabees introduces scenes that are some of the most intense in the Bible. It describes martyrdom, and that's where we'll pick up in part 3, because what happens next isn't just about fighting back. It's about standing firm when the cost becomes unbearable. It's about what conviction looks like when everything is on the line. So in part 3, I'm going to show you why some people chose suffering over surrender, not because they were reckless, but because they understood what was at stake. The cost of conviction, martyrs, light, and restoration. In part 1, we dealt with the myth, why the Maccabees disappeared from many Bibles and why people feared it. In part 2, we told the story of resistance, how Mattathias refused, how Judas led, and how a movement was born under pressure. Now in part 3, we face the hardest part of the story, the martyrs, the restoration, and the message that still speaks today. This is where you see what integrity costs and why it still matters. The martyrs. 2nd Maccabees includes scenes that are some of the most intense in the Bible. And this is where people might say, this is too heavy. Yes, it is heavy, but heavy doesn't mean harmful. Heavy means serious. 2nd Maccabees tells the story of an elderly teacher named Eleazar who is pressured to compromise. What makes this story powerful isn't only the pressure from enemies, but the subtle temptation of an easy exit. There's a suggestion that he could fake compliance. He could appear to compromise while secretly remaining faithful so that he might live. But he refuses. Why? Because he understands young people are watching. And if he, an elder, makes compromise look acceptable, he teaches the next generation that integrity is flexible. He chooses suffering rather than becoming a symbol of surrender. Then there's another account that's even more intense. The story of a mother and her sons, pressured one by one to abandon the law. They're offered the chance to save themselves if they compromise, if they just bend, if they just obey. But one by one they refuse. 2nd Maccabees presents this as courage rooted in hope. Hope that life is more than the body. Hope that God's justice isn't limited to this moment. Hope that faithfulness matters even when the world demands surrender. Now listen carefully, because this is where I want to bring it back to the childhood rumor. If a child reads these scenes without context, it might shake them, it might disturb them, it might leave them with questions. But that's not insanity. That's the weight of human suffering and moral choice. And the reason the story is included isn't to break the reader, it's to build the reader, to show what conviction looks like when pressure is real. The temple restored. Now, as the story continues, the resistance pushes back, and eventually they reclaim Jerusalem. They return to the area of the temple, and they see desecration, they see sacred worship disrupted and defiled. They see what was meant to be holy, treated as nothing. So they cleanse it, they rebuild, they restore worship, they rededicate the temple. That moment isn't just a religious ceremony. It's a psychological and spiritual turning point. It's a people saying, we're still here, we haven't been erased, we haven't been rewritten, we have come back to what is right. And this period is closely associated with the theme behind Hanukkah, the celebration of dedication and light. Even if you're not Jewish, the symbol still speaks. After darkness, light returns. After defilement, cleansing. After pressure, restoration. And it's worth remembering this. 1st Maccabees often reads like a record of events, while 2nd Maccabees leans into spiritual meaning. 2 angles, one era, one struggle for identity, the imperfect ending. Now let me be clear, the story doesn't end with a perfect movie ending. 1st Maccabees continues beyond the rededication. It shows politics, alliances, internal challenges, continuing conflicts, and the complexity of leadership. Because winning a battle is one thing, building a future is another. And the story remains honest. After survival, the work continues. The temptation of power continues. The danger of corruption continues. The struggle of identity continues. 2nd Maccabees also includes further episodes that underline how moral and spiritual life isn't a one-time victory. It's maintained through humility, prayer, and right leadership. 5 lessons for today. So let's bring this home. We don't tell Bible stories just to know history. We tell them because they hold patterns that repeat in human life. Here's what Maccabees teaches clearly and strongly. Lesson 1. Pressure always targets identity. Sometimes it targets it by law, sometimes by culture, sometimes by social shame, sometimes by fear. It starts small. Laugh at your values. Shame your discipline. Call your morals old-fashioned. Tell you that you're too strict. Tell you that you're doing too much. Then it grows. Normalize compromise. Reward surrender. Punish conviction. And if you're not careful, one day you look in the mirror and you don't recognize yourself. Lesson 2. Compromise often dresses itself as wisdom. People will say, don't be extreme, don't be difficult, just do it this once, just blend in, just keep the peace. But the Maccabees expose the lie. Not every adaptation is growth. Some adaptations are erasure. Lesson 3. Courage is contagious. One refusal can awaken a whole community. One person saying no can remind others they don't have to surrender. Lesson 4. Faith is not only emotion, faith is practice. When pressure comes, feelings won't carry you. Discipline will, training will, structure will, community will, prayer will. A life built on habits is stronger than a life built only on moods. Lesson 5. Restoration is real. This is a word for people who have drifted, a word for people who have compromised, a word for people who feel defiled, a word for people who feel they've lost their way. The rededication shows you can cleanse, rebuild, and return. You can restore what you let fall. You can come back to what is right. Closing, answering the childhood question. Now let me close by returning to the childhood question, because this is the heart of why I wanted to do this. As a child, I heard that Maccabees was hidden and that it could confuse you or drive you insane. Now, as an adult, I can say this calmly. In many households, these books felt hidden because they weren't printed in many later editions and they weren't preached much in many traditions, so people didn't see them. And what people don't see, they question. As for the claim that they drive people insane, there's no credible basis for that. They're heavy. They include suffering, martyrdom, and war. They can shake you emotionally. They can confuse you if you don't know the context, but they're not dangerous in that way. They're revealing. They reveal what happens when power tries to rewrite conscience. They reveal what happens when a community is pressured to surrender identity. And they reveal what courage looks like when the cost becomes real. Final message. So if you're listening to this today, here's my final message. When you're pressured to betray your conscience, that moment is a crossroads. That moment shapes you. Maccabees isn't only a story about fighting, it's a story about staying true. And sometimes staying true is the bravest thing a person can do. If this connected with you, leave a comment. Did you grow up hearing the same thing? Did your Bible include these books? And what do you think the story teaches today? Would you like us to go deeper? Because some of the deepest lessons aren't always in the loudest chapters. Sometimes they're in the chapters people stopped talking about. End of part 3.